Jordan, welcome to Property Management Brainstorm.
Hey, Bob, it's a pleasure, my man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you bet. I'm so glad you're here. Been really excited for it. And Jordan, you're a well-known guy in this industry. You've got your hands in several companies and even an event focused on property management. And as I mentioned in our intro, your own podcast too. So maybe a really good place to start is let us know about yourself, what you've been up to personally, and then specifically what's new at Lead Simple to help property managers with their processes.
Yeah, well, Bob, I'm the CEO of Lead Simple. As you were alluding to, I do have involvement in some other projects. I co-founded an event called PM Grow with a friend of mine, and I have a company called Profit Coach, which provides outsourced accounting and finance solutions for the property management industry, and a company called the Rent Scale that does sales consulting. Lead Simple, the company that you referenced, is the leading CRM in the property management industry. And we also provide workflow solutions, which we've pivoted into to really help people go from closing a new deal to actually onboarding a property, onboarding a client, and really managing that entire life cycle of property management successfully.
So there are a few terms that sometimes get grouped into this category together. And we've already mentioned checklists. There's, you've probably heard of the standard operating procedures, right? Policies is another term, systems manuals, workflow, right? These are some other terms. Do all these mean the same thing to you, or does process stand out with its own definition?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I kind of hear that cacophony of familiar terms all being mushed together as well. I think the distinctions that matter to me, first and foremost, is policy. Policy is a way of codifying a thought or a philosophy on how the organization should be run. At least that's what it can be at its best.
Sure.
Below policy is the actual implementation, the execution, and that's where we can get into something that looks more like a checklist or a workflow. So I think you always got to kind of start at the top of what is the vision for how to run the company? How does that translate into culture? How does that translate into policy? And then when we're talking about workflow, we're just talking about the execution of the work.
Okay. So does then process have more dynamic aspects to it than, say, a workflow or perhaps a operating procedure, which is more static? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that my experience, Bob, has been that it's really attractive to think that I'm going to come up with, or somebody is going to give me the process. What I find is that the process, regardless of any of thop, SOP, a workflow, a process, it's a moving target. It's changing, and that often we are the ones that are breaking it by virtue of our own ambition to grow, to streamline, to become more profitable, etc. So all of these things are really a fluid, moving target, regardless of what name it goes by.
Yeah, let's talk about property management specifically then. Why is process so critical in property management?
That's a great question. Being in it, you always kind of wonder, well, what is unique or special about this industry? Obviously, we all know that it's complex and there's a lot of challenges. Is it any more or less complex than other industries? As I've thought about it and meditated it over time, I've come to the conclusion that there are fundamentally more moving parts here than in other industries. The constituencies, the frequency of events taking place, the flow of communication through multiple parties, there really is a lot of dynamicism going on here. And furthermore, I think where the real nuance is understanding what can be systematized in a process that is, let's call it rigid to the point of saying you must do it this way, which is what we all want. And what aspects of it are fundamentally dynamic, things that will always be a matter of judgment. And if you hire a monkey that does not have the ability to implement judgment, they cannot do the job properly. I think teasing out the nuance of those things is really the difference between being able to effectively implement systems versus being overly wooden, or versus believing that everything has to be decided on a dynamic one-off basis and no standardization is possible.
Well, that's really interesting because we have system manuals in place currently, and we've been looking at your solution, which is easy to modify. You can view it on your screen. You can apply it to a specific person, a property, and it takes an individual on our staff through that process, almost like a guided tour, right? Mm-hmm. The system manuals are great, but they're a PDF on our file server. So realistically, when a person's in the middle of a job, are they really going to be flipping through those pages and referring to this PDF, this static
Right.
document? And that's where I've sort of had issue in the way we have implemented it so far, which brings me to why we're so interested in your solution, right now. And I guess it's also a matter of scale, right?
Sure.
How fast your business is growing. When I started North County Property Group, I can tell you, I was in my spare bedroom. I had processes for everything, but they were all in my head, right? I
Hmm.
didn't really have them documented. I didn't necessarily need to, but as the company grew, then I had to teach other people what to do. And that's where the problem started, because I would have to explain it to someone, repeat myself. The next day, they'd ask again. And I didn't have some sort of a captured process in place, right? So there's this kind of tribal knowledge, or I call
Yeah.
it Bob legacy stuff, that gets passed along, and that is pretty ineffective at times. Do you hear that a lot from some of your clients?
I experience it in my own companies. I can think of a
Yeah.
call I had just the other week where I'm talking to one of my co-founders, and we're growing, and the conversation was like, hey, this thing, like your fingers have been pried off of quite a few things, but this last finger on this last issue has
Right.
got to be
I
pulled
could,
off, and you don't want to delegate it because if you get it wrong, something really blows up. It's really significant. But that kind of work needs to go through the normal channel and people and protocols. And so I think it's natural for that shift to happen, because as the business owner, your gut is right. You are having to slow down to speed up, and that's no fun. But the question is always, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, what does the leverage look like then? And as we know, it's worth it. It's a worthy investment.